In Bible study this week, we're talking about rules. I know. Stick around though, I promise, because it's going to be awesome. We're talking about rules and the law. So if you start reading the Bible from the very, very beginning, you'll get about halfway through the second book, Exodus, and you'll come to a bunch of ancient laws. Thou shalt do this, thou shalt do that. There is over 600 laws. There are actually 613 commandments, all given to ancient Israel, not just those 10 commandments that you might know of. And so as you read through them, you might wonder, am I supposed to obey all of these? I mean, like, what's the purpose of that? I know I have them, like 613 laws. That's insane. And since reading, ancient law code isn't something you and your friends do a lot, odds are you're going to struggle with it. So let's talk about how to read law in the Bible and why it's important. So the first thing to remember, you guys, is that the Bible is not a behavior manual with a complete list of what to do and not do to make God happy. The Bible is an epic narrative, but in the story, God does tell people what to do. These commands are invitations to trust God's wisdom. And so Israel, we're going back to Exodus. Israel is enslaved in Egypt. So God saves them and he invites them into a covenant relationship, kind of like a marriage. And then he has laws that make up the terms of this covenant. And the people of Israel, they don't trust God and they don't live by his wisdom. And so while the laws may be good and show God's wisdom, they also expose Israel's inability to be God's faithful partners. So God creates humanity who rebels. And then God chooses Abraham to bless all the nations through his family, who then actually end up in slavery down in Egypt. So God rescues them. And then at Mount Sinai, God makes a covenant with Israel and with Moses, like an agreement, just like we talked about. And all of the laws Moses gives to Israel are the terms of that agreement. And some of those laws, they're about rituals and customs that set Israel apart from other nations. And other laws are about social justice and morality. And by following these, Israel would show the other nations what God is like. And so I want you to pay attention here because you're going to see a really clear pattern. Moses gives the first laws to Israel, right? Don't worship other gods, don't make idols. And then right after that, there's a story of Israel breaking those laws. Yeah, so there's the worship of the golden calf. And so Moses gives some more laws. And then you hear more stories of rebellion. Some more laws, rebellion, more laws, rebellion. And you see the point. No matter how many laws are given, they're just going to continue to rebel. And if we look at these laws specifically, you find a lot of really strange stuff, you guys. Like not allowing clothing to be made of two different fabrics, weird things like that. So how does that show God's wisdom? We need to look at this, and it's important to realize that many of these laws are ancient ritual symbols that set Israel apart. So some laws made Israel distinct from neighboring nations, while other laws kept them away from things that in their culture symbolize death and disease and corruption. But not all laws are ancient rituals. Some of them are just about being a good person and treating others well. And these laws aren't, just about being good. They're really about justice and equality, which is a really big deal to God. And so on the first page of the Bible, we learn that every human is made in God's image and is worthy of dignity. These laws express a core ideal of God's wisdom, and the laws show how these ideals could be applied in the culture of ancient Israel. But as we talked about before, Israel failed at fulfilling the law over and over and over again. So how the heck is God going to get humans to trust his wisdom? Well, Moses and the prophets after him trusted that one day God would transform the human heart so people can be faithful covenant partners with God and trust his wisdom. Ezekiel said that if Israel was ever going to obey the law, God's Spirit would have to transform their hard hearts into soft hearts. And Isaiah, he promised a future leader, Israel's Messiah, who would lead all the people in obedience to the law. So, We have the law and we have the prophets, and they are telling one connected story about God's desire to bless the whole world through a people, Israel, who it turns out needs a new heart. And so that brings us to the story of Jesus. Jesus said he came to fulfill the law. He was the faithful covenant partner that Israel and all of humanity was made to be but failed to be. And so Jesus took all of these 613 laws and he said, forget those. These are the two you need to know. Love God with everything you have, with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, with all your elbows, with all your toes, with everything that you are. And to love your neighbor as yourself, to put others first, to think of them. And Jesus then promised that God's Spirit would come and transform his followers so that they too could live this way. And so where Israel failed, Jesus brought this story to its fulfillment. He fully loved God and others, and he showed all of the nations what God is truly like. He did this through acts of compassion and mercy, and ultimately by loving his enemies even unto death. And after his resurrection, he told his followers that he'd send God's Spirit to transform their hearts so they could follow him and fulfill the purpose of the law, to love God and love their neighbor. When followers of Jesus read these laws today, when we read these today, we need to remember that they were given to Israel in their ancient cultural setting. And we couldn't follow many of these even if we tried. So what we can do with it, though, is see God's wisdom in the laws and trust that God's Spirit can guide us to follow that wisdom as we learn to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. Jesus came to not abolish the law and get rid of it, but he came to fulfill the law and give us a simple rule book to live. Instead of these 613 laws, we are set free. We have 2 commands he gives us: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And so the challenge this week is to find 2 opportunities this week. One of them is, how can I love God with all my heart, all my soul, all my mind, and all my strength, and all my toes and all my elbows and everything, all my nose, whatever it is. How can we love God with everything we have? That can go in a lot of ways. If you don't know if you love God, or you have questions, I challenge you to use this challenge to explore that and to learn more about who God is and who Jesus is. And if you have questions, come to any of the staff at JSAW, and we would love to sit down and talk to you and try and wrestle with and answer those questions. We want your questions. And if you do love God and you've accepted Jesus as your Savior and your Lord, I would challenge you to read the Bible, to pray, to put on some worship music, to just express to God how much you love him, and align your mind and your heart and everything to him. And then the next one, which everybody can do, is to love your neighbor as yourself. It's a really, really hard thing when we put it into practice. However, there are some simple ideas that you can do to start loving your neighbor as yourself. Let's see. You can open the door for someone. You can smile at a stranger. You can wave. You can compliment someone. Say, "I love your outfit," or "Wow, that was an amazing trick." Or if you're at the dinner table or at Bible study, you can take away someone's plate when they're done eating. Yeah, there are so many things that you can do to love your neighbor as yourself. So I challenge you to get creative, love your neighbor, and learn more about God, who loves you and has set you free from these rules and these laws, so that you can focus on loving him with everything you have and loving others as much as you love yourself. All right, that is it for Bible study, you guys. Thank you so much. I am so excited to see you this week. All right, bye.